adaptive capacity. I'm Harriette Rasmussen. I don't know what you know about me, but I call myself an educational consultant. I work primarily in public schools. I work almost entirely with leadership teams and also with teachers, and I build networks within and across schools and districts to help them learn how to learn from each other. There's one of the most important things you need to know about me is that I am hearing impaired. So you're going to see me walking around the room if you're talking, and I might walk right up and look at your face because I'm trying to see your lips and hear you. So it can be annoying, and I apologize for that, but that is my reality. The other thing is that it's interesting, most of the time I'm working with school leaders and I say, and teachers, I say, I've never done your job. Just know that going in, I've never done your job. Well, I have actually been an independent school trustee a couple times. So I have a sense of your job. I have a sense of your role in an institution where you have an extraordinary amount of responsibility and sometimes not a lot of control. So I have that sense, and at the same time, I also don't know your realities, and I don't know your schools. So I'm really excited to be presenting today. I love my topic. I am part of a network of people around the world who are fascinated by complexity and adult development. We call ourselves the complexity geeks. And so that has shaped a lot of my practice. We're going to, actually the session we just had was interesting because a lot of the world we were talking about is exactly the reason why adaptive capacity is so important right now. I think in my introduction, I talked about our world being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that is certainly the landscape I think we find ourselves in more and more increasingly. And it's why I think more and more we're faced with problems. I'm going to be drawing a lot on some of the work of Juan Carlos Eichels today. He brought adaptive concept into organizational capacity. And one of his basic premises is that if we didn't have problems, we wouldn't need adaptation. But if you can't adapt with the problems, then you will fail, right? So one of the things I just had you do at your table was to talk about what problems, why you're here, what problem you may have brought with you today. And I would love to hear from you before we get started on what brought you here. Why was this session of interest? Yes?
I'm very concerned that we're educating students for jobs that don't exist, businesses that don't exist, and careers that don't exist, in a world that we have no clue what it's going to be like. And we have such certainty. And then with college dictating what they have to do, and I think they're totally wrong, that I want to weigh out before it's too late.
So you want to be able to predict?
I want us to all change in the right direction because we're going the wrong way.
Well, yes, and it's interesting because you've got the colleges in one place, right? And then you've got all the realities you see at in independent schools. So, what else? What else brought you here?
I feel that our students have high levels of anxiety and are being driven toward college, but they're losing their creative capacity and their abilities to take risks and to really be actively participating in social emotional containers where they're learning what it means to be with each other as humans in their humanity.
So really talking about the culture, not just of the school, but also of the classroom, how you create an organization, that where failure is an opportunity to learn, where not everything is judged by a number, and where creativity is part of the curriculum. Yes?
We talk a lot about, emotional intelligence and social learning, but I think that just as we talk about critical thinking in the academic and intellectual sense, the think we should be focusing on the complexities of social learning and asking and teaching kids how to deal with, we talked about making instant decisions in Facebook, social media, etc. That sense of judgment is something that we spend a lot of time with our kids, and the truth is that many of them make so many judgments so quickly, and I think that we almost need to focus on the complexities of social learning and high levels of
Yeah, so Joyce, you were just talking about the complexity of social and emotional learning and what that really looks like in practice. I would go a step further and say, propose that the complexity of academic learning is just as powerful and just as prevalent. So today I'm going to introduce you to a couple of frameworks. So I'm going to give you information for like about 8 or 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have you process that, and then we'll share it out. And so I'm going to do that 3 times to kind of know the general arc of our time today. And I would like you to keep your big ideas or your challenges that you have in your school front and center. I find that I'd like you to make that the relevance that you try to apply these frameworks on. Otherwise, they're going to feel very academic. And they are academic, but that is, so part of them will be a way for you to think about as you analyze problems. If you sit as a trustee, you sit around that table and think about your next moves as an organization, as a school. How are you thinking about where your school sits in the frame of complexity and the frame of that activity? No, does that make sense? Okay. So the first framework I'm going to introduce to you is called the Kennedy framework. It was created by a gentleman by the name of David Snowden at Cognitive Edge. And he looks at organizations through 4 basic lenses: simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. So the way we define simple is that when you have a very obvious cause and effect, you get the same thing that happens every time you use it. So accounting practices, you would want simple organization. In the simple practices, we know what it is, we categorize it, we respond. And we can label best practice for that. In a complicated world, there are more variables at stake, and there are more options when you think about cause and effect. So as you're thinking about the right strategy for your school, you're solving a problem, you're looking at how to move into the future, there might be several different ways to go, and apply some research. So in this sense, you sense, you analyze it, and then you respond. And we have good practice there, because you have a variety of kinds of practice. There's no one right answer. So these ways of approaching a problem, or approaching or thinking about your work very well in a predictable world. We know that if we do these things, this will happen. Right? But when we get over to the complex side, the relationship and the variables are so great that it can go in 1,000 different directions. All right? So Joyce was talking about the complexity of social emotional learning, and you think about all these little bodies walking into your classroom. And I spend probably 80% of my professional life in classrooms, watching instruction and working with leaders around how to make sense of their system in terms of what they need to have happen in the classroom. And I see every day, you see these little bodies, they bring in every emotion that they walk in the door with. They bring in every piece of background information that one child may have and another child doesn't, right? Different ways of responding to the content. So when you're in complex situations, you have to kind of feel your way through it, right? You probe, then you figure out what you're going to do, and then you respond. Most of this work is emergent. Okay? The last box is when we try and stay out of it, and that's where you're jumping into chaos, and this is where things have really gone belly up. And you can't ever find any relationships. And that's where you jump in, you act, then you sense, and then you respond. But you have to go in and get order first, right? So this is where there's novel practice. It's never the same. And this is by and large an unpredictable world. So if I think about what we were listening to in the last hour, and about how rapidly things are changing, and about some of the things that you've already spoken to this afternoon about why you're here, a lot of our work is in an unpredictable world. So this is why it's helpful to be thinking about whatever your problem you're analyzing, first figure out where it lies. So take a minute at your table and think about things, and then I'd like you to discuss it. I'm thinking in the bit larger groups. Why don't you kind of just split into two groups? But how would you classify the problem? Whatever you're thinking and what you're bringing with you today, whatever's going on in your school, your challenges as a trustee, where do they fit in this?
Your school goes.
Thank you. So I want to hear some of what you've been talking about, and also want to answer any questions you may have, things you're wondering about. To the extent that I can answer it, I will. So what are some of the things that emerge from you? Where would you put your problems and the issues that you're wrestling with as trustee on this framework? Go ahead.
So we were talking a little bit about how the kids have become more monochromatic and not able to take as many risks, and I was, because of, I think, some of the achievements that they think that you need to have for college, and I put it in the complex category.
Okay. So the challenges and the pressure that kids have right now on them. And yet we assess learning in almost in a simple category, right? I don't know the extent to which your schools use standardized tests. Certainly they are, in my opinion, way too prevalent in public schools, but certainly colleges and for admissions, which I know everybody here is thinking in that line, they use those very simple tools to assess it. What else?
I was talking about our particular situation. We've added a high school now, so we're infant high school. And for the board members, just to help in that long-range vision of how to maintain, because we're Montessori, to maintain that Montessori balance as we move into high school. And so we put that in the complex.
Yeah, really, and sometimes the complexity comes from your external community. It may not be so much an internal issue, but as trustees, you answer in large part to your stakeholders, right? And a lot of those stakeholders are your parents, not all of them, but a lot of them are. One more. Yes.
Well, we were talking about doing an additional pre-K class because our enrollment in kindergarten was quite low this year, so they're talking about building a deeper bench.
Mm-hmm.
So the board's been talking about it, the teachers have been brought in, the principal's presenting us with a, kind of a plan and scheduling and how it would all work. So I think we're at the complicated part because we're really analyzing it, and it hasn't been rolled out to the community yet. So, but I think it's manageable.
Right, so there are a lot of things that are very, very challenging and have a lot of moving parts that fall into complicated. If you've ever flown in and out of Heathrow Airport, that's a complicated place, but there aren't any wrong answers. And so one of the challenges, one of the issues with complicated is you have a number of different answers. So planning and enrollment, predicting the future, figuring out how you're going to scale up your capacity to do a particular type of getting the students retaining kindergarten. It's interesting, when I show this to most school leaders, they, first of all, their jaws drop, and then they kind of go, well, we kind of see things in all three of these. Nobody wants to go here. I mean, we get here. I was in a school earlier this fall where I had, there were 18 new teachers out of 24. You can imagine that. 18 new teachers and a new vice and they were talking about nobody knew how to do lunch. Now, it sounds like a small thing, but it was chaos. And I finally said, this is an issue where you don't collaborate here. You just go in and you tell somebody how to do it. So they were in a chaotic situation, and it's one of the things that it's helpful to figure out here is that when you have simple issues or you have chaos, there's a leadership response that is appropriate, which is command and control. In other words, if there's only one right way to do it, then you do it. You tell them, you just do it, right? If you're in the middle of chaos, somebody has got to go in there and make order happen, right? It doesn't mean you stay there, because you ultimately want chaos to either move into complex or back to simple. Okay? Well, when you were in the other two worlds, that requires collaboration. Even in the predictable aspects of the complicated work, because there are more than one direction you can take, that requires collaboration. And that has a lot to do with your role as trustees. As you think about where do you prioritize your time, where do you think about in working with your stakeholders. So I'm going to spend a minute on stakeholders and talk a little bit about that, because in my experience as a trustee and what I know about political situations, and being a trustee is largely political, this is what I call how do you hold steady in the midst of an adaptive challenge. So a complex challenge. So one of the ways in which I see the challenges of being a trustee is you have stakeholders with a lot of different needs. Your parents may fall easily into one group, or they may be divided into factions. What I found is that once a decision is made, you usually get some factioning. Somebody's going to like it and somebody isn't. It's really hard to come up with a decision that everybody's happy with. So there's a lot of reasons why your stakeholders react. They have different stakes in the challenge. You have some stakeholders that want their kids to be really socially, emotionally nourished, right? And they might want a different kind of decision than a parent who wants to make sure that their child is going to Ivy League. So be aware that people have different stakes in the challenge. There might be different preferred resolutions, which puts you right in the middle of it, right? There's degrees of concern. So for me, it's really, really, really important that my child learns how to think in school. So when somebody's talking about a very small piece of the curriculum that somebody else might think is horrible, if it doesn't affect that, I might not be worried about it, right? So the degree of concern, values and beliefs, loyalties and obligations. So values and beliefs, I think one of the most challenging things that we have always is that you can't talk somebody out of their values. Values don't come from the head, they come from here. They come from your gut. So if you've heard the distinctions between adaptive and technical work, which Ron Heifetz, and this is one of his diagrams. One of the things he talks about, adaptive work, which is largely complex. Adaptive work is that work, the challenge that comes from your gut. It's your heart, it's your stomach, that's what wrenches, and it's so hard to let go of it. And so when I think about stakeholders and the factions and all the voices, these are really the voices in your head. Because you've got people that you're you need to be loyal to. And everybody's talking in your head. And you've got all these different voices. And this is part of what you have to navigate. So being really clear then about what it is you're navigating. Is it a simple or complicated situation, or is it complex? Helps you step back a little bit and think about what's your role as a trustee. So let's just turn and talk for a few minutes, just thinking about what we just talked about, process that. Thinking about how you hold steady in complexity, how that fits with your world, some of your issues as a trustee in complexity, and holding steady, thinking about the stakeholders, the voices in your head, values and beliefs that are different, factions that join when you make a decision. Okay? Spend a few minutes and talk about that.
We don't want to stop on hold.
The idea that actually you can go in this path and it will be this way, or you can go this path and it will be this way. Either one are reasonable.
So what kind of things came up for you?
We actually have a question related
Yes.
to one of your things. When you said there was division after a decision, were you talking about within a school community or within the board specifically?
Oh, yes. Perhaps. I believe that any time a decision is made, I mean, often I would hope as a board, most of the time, you've got complete ownership of a decision, especially when it's something that is adaptive, that's going to hit people, where you have to go out there and really work with people to try and help them understand and get underneath their values. And we could go way into adaptive leadership strategies, but that's a whole nother section. So mostly I was thinking about being within a community and working. So I know as a head of school, you're going to make a decision. You're going to have some teachers that are going to like it and some that aren't. As a trustee, you make a decision. You've got some parents that are going to be right on board with you and some that are going, this isn't what I was thinking. Whose school is this anyway? That ever come up? Yeah. What else emerged? What did you all talk about here?
Well, one of the things that came up at our school is that after a very collaborative strategic planning process, one of the items was soliciting more feedback throughout the year from all constituencies. So in the classroom, for example, soliciting feedback from students, in middle and upper school, partway through the course, and soliciting feedback from parents, beginning and end of the year. And that's kind of part of our mission, is to be responsive. However, there are some faculty who don't really appreciate or seek feedback. And that's one of the reasons.
Board?
And the board is behind this, of course, and the board craves feedback. We want to look at the temperature of alumni and faculty and parents and students who really want to know how people feel. And it's a chance to continually advance our mission. But the complexity is that faculty have their ways of teaching, and not every faculty member has that open mindset.
So as I said, most of the time I'm working at a school level. I'm looking at how principals or heads of school move people, right? This is the essence of adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership is required when you have to take people somewhere that they don't want to go, right? And that happens a lot in constituencies and stakeholder groups, but it happens probably mostly within faculty, where I've been here for a long time. This is what I love to do. I know this. I don't want to go in a different direction. The challenge with feedback is that you might have to do something with it, right? I'm remembering years ago we were trying to put some feedback loops into a big high school. And the challenge and the pushback we got from teachers saying, we don't want you asking our students, because what might they say? And then what does that mean for me? So really tough choice. Yeah, I get that. There's one of the things that happens in complexity is that the more uncertain and unstable things get, the natural human reaction is to hold on tight. Remember that. That's our natural reaction. And you get why, right? I have to control something because I can't control anything. So especially when you're the one responsible. I'm responsible for all these kids. I'm responsible for all these teachers and these kids. I'm responsible for the future of this school as an organization. So that's part of an oxymoron, is how do you hold steady and still be able to move and adapt as you need to be responsive. Now, one of the things we're really talking about here is adaptive capacity. And for anyone who's interested, this is, and I don't remember where I heard about this guy. He's works out of Chile. Most of his work is in Spanish, and I can't read a lot of it. This one's in English. But he studied under Ron Heifetz at Harvard and took Ron's work, as I think I said earlier, into kind of the next level. Really, what does an organization look like? So we're going to shift from thinking about you as leaders in complexity and thinking about the level of complexity to adaptive capacity. What is it? So this is going to be another framework, and you will get slides, by the way. These will all be up on the website or however that works. But so IPOLS talks about 4 basic types of organizations. Okay, so he also has these frames. He says that you've got the hierarchical organization. Sorry, I need a laser thing. And a participatory. So that's at the bottom. Hierarchical, where it's very pyramid, right? Command and control kind of hierarchy. Right? So bureaucratic organization, very internally oriented, very hierarchical. Government, great example. We do things the same way, the same time. I know what my job is, very safe, right? You move up to more of a participatory, but still internally oriented, and you've got more of a communal organization, meaning we're internally focused, we know what we're doing, we know best, we've got these kids, schools very often fall right here, but they're more participatory because we work to get everybody involved, we want buy-in, we want ownership, we need faculty on board, right? So generally, schools fall up in the communal field. And action-oriented is more driven by the external environment, but it's still very hierarchical. I wouldn't necessarily put action-oriented organizations in those that are innovative, or they can begin innovative and then they lose their edge because they still say somebody's in control, somebody's making the decisions, and you don't know how much flexibility and how much new thinking is coming into that. I would claim, I don't know, does anybody here work for Microsoft? Okay, well, I would claim Microsoft to fall into the action category. They were very hierarchical from the get-go. They have under their new leadership, they are trying to move up that to more participatory. So the innovative organization is defined as very participatory. You've got a lot of information that's shared constantly, and is also really responsible to the external environment. Does that make sense? Okay. The other thing that I find really interesting to think about are the dominant values that call people to work and be associated with these kinds of organizations. And as you think about not just your stakeholders, but also the internal organization, thinking about why people have chosen this kind of an organization to work in. So you've got the safety factor in bureaucracy. I know what's going to happen. I do the same thing every day. I'm not going to lose my job. People who tend to go for bureaucratic organizations like to be safe. Communal are defined by a sense of belonging. We're here together, we love each other, and we call that often the land of nice in education. We make sure everybody feels good a lot, right? Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Action are very focused by accomplishment. They want to see those results. You go back to the complicated piece on the frame and think about the way in which we define success in most public schools in this country. It's a number, right? So that would fall into an action-oriented. And then the innovative organization is a desire to make a difference. Purpose. A desire to make a difference. I want to make an impact. So, unfortunately, I would say probably the most effective, global, innovative, adaptive organization in the world right now. Anybody want to guess? ISIS. ISIS. Nobody who's involved with ISIS is more clear than white hair. That is a completely purpose-driven organization. Just because it's purpose-driven doesn't mean it's good. But it does show you think about, when you think about, you can cut out the leg of a starfish and it grows a new one. If you infiltrate a network or a purpose-driven organization, the strength is in the fact that everybody knows why they're there and what they're there for. So Amazon would be in this, probably. Google, for sure, right? Intel. Think about even the way that those organizations are organized, where they've got, I live around the corner from Google in Kirkland. And there's a beach volleyball court there. There's a railroad car. There's a dog park. It's a public park, and all during the day you see people communing and talking and collaborating and walking together and talking. It's a very different kind of office than you would see at action-oriented. Okay? So just a quick share to figure out where that is your school right now. Where are your schools? What do you think? Yeah.
I don't know if I have an answer for you, but it strikes me that some of these quadrants don't seem to be easily mutually exclusive.
Yes, good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I always rely on people to remind me what I forgot to say. So it is true that most organizations have aspects of all of that. Just as in the Kenneman framework, most organizations have aspects of each of that level of complexity or simplicity. Absolutely. So let me change my question a little bit. If you were to find a dominant area that your school would fall, where do you think? Communal. Would that be true for most of you? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say innovative. We really took a step off a cliff to add the high school. And, the reason for that, the impact of that.
It's scary. I mean, I have 4 children. 3 are gone and gone and launched, and then I have a high school freshman. And I get what it's like to be a parent of a kid, and I have seen the change over the last 20 years in education, watching my children have been in both private and public school, and watching the emphasis and watching the change and realizing this is my kid's future, right? It is scary. It's high stakes, very high stakes. So as we think about adaptive capacity, because that's what we're talking about, is creating more capacity. Obviously, I think you can tell we're trying to move some of the dominant features of your organization in that northeasterly direction. I thought that Mark's, remember that graphic he put up there with the 4 quadrants? Seems like we're always trying to move in a northeasterly direction. And I couldn't see, well, but I couldn't see the details of those lower quadrants. But I would bet that a lot of the kinds of things that he was talking about would fit well into the idea that we're moving toward more flexibility, more innovation. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about how to do that. Okay, so ICOLT has some levers to do that. And we're going to look at the clock. So this is, I think, one of the big challenges. I'm going to go right back to the stakeholders for just a minute. That holding steady, part of your job and part of your work in navigating all of those voices in your head is to figure out in your school what's most precious and then what's expensive. And that's a very difficult conversation. And you do that by predicting what's at stake for your stakeholders. So I think there's just one kind of basic idea. As you think about moving northeasterly, rightward and upward on that quadrant, this idea that every time you are asking somebody to change something that hits them in the gut, right? This is what I think school should be about. This is why I came to this school. But this is my school. I've been here for 15 years. I've had 3 kids. You can't change direction on me. You don't have that right. All of those conversations happen when you start moving and changing, right? What's important to recognize is that for each one of those individuals, what they are really resisting is loss. I'm going to say that again because it's one of the most important premises of adaptive work. People don't resist change. People resist loss. And if you want to help people get through change, you have to figure out what's at stake for them and what they gain to lose by the change. And that's where you start. We had a great, fascinating conversation a couple weeks ago, working with a principal, and he had a teacher who was really difficult. So just difficult with staff meetings and just always causing trouble with the union and all the things that happen a lot in public school. And we did what we call some stakeholder mapping. And this is somebody who is zealous about special needs kids. Nothing wrong with that. But what we finally realized was that what was at stake for her in trying to kind of soften her stance and help her, what was at stake was her identity as the advocate for special needs kids in that school. Once we figured that out, we learned a whole lot and came up with a whole lot of ideas about how to support her. So we helped her hang on to her identity, but helped her think about how to reshape the way she went about that. But if we hadn't had that conversation, if we hadn't really gotten underneath what she was really resisting, then so you can start grasping at straws and going in a whole lot of different directions you may never get. I'm going to keep going because I want to get to the adaptive capacity levers, and then we'll have time. I want to give you some time at the end, but I'm going to go on and give you about another 8-10 minutes of information. Are you okay with that? Okay. So this is, I think, one of the most important graphics that ICOS has, and like any of you who has worked with Heifetz adaptive leadership, it's just with them. But so you think about adaptive capacity as being having the ability to be responsive, to be flexible, to be able to move toward external demand, to be able to adjust where you need to. So there are certain things that help. One is time. So that's the bottom axis. And the upper axis is this level of disequilibrium or tension that comes to us when we're trying to change something. Time. So people respond in different ways to that. Sometimes if you're trying to make a change, you're trying to become more adaptive, people will just resort and just say, it's not my deal, somebody else made me do it, go into the classroom, close the door, I'm going to be subverted. Some of that is we call work avoidance. Okay? If you ask people to do more than the organization is capable, and that they are capable of navigating emotionally or physically, then you are moving into destruction. So you have to, as leaders, you have to figure out how to make sure the work and the capacity, whatever you're trying to do, stays within this zone where you have capacity to do it. Does that make sense? So that's the adaptive capacity part. So if you want to increase your adaptive capacity, you need to increase the responsiveness, so you need to widen this, so you increase the responsiveness to the external environment. Remember that participatory and the external part? We're talking about the external environment on that graphic. So you want to increase the level of responsiveness of the organization. You also want to increase the participation of the organization. And that's what we call the holding tank or the holding environment. You have to make it safe for that environment. Okay? You with me so far? All right. So what we're doing is we're going to expand the adaptive capacity that you have currently in your organization. And ICOS has 5 levers to do that. Purpose, strategy, structure, culture, and talent. So really quickly, and he has a very nice way of framing these. Purpose, he calls the organization's soul. why we're there, what's the impact we want to make, right? Strategy, he calls the organization's brain. So this is how we're using our head, this is our intellect, this is how our best guess on how we're going to get somewhere that we want to go. Structure, the skeleton, right? The skeleton, so what are the pieces in place? What do the committees look like? What are the, all the technical and structural elements of your organization? Culture, the blood. It is what holds you together. Culture is sneaky because it's like DNA. You can't see it. You're in the middle of it, you feel it, it's what you do without even thinking about it. A lot of times we'll say we're changing the culture. Well, that's not really true. We're changing behaviors. And over time, you hope to change your culture. But you can't just change the culture. It's the blood. It's what people do without even thinking of it. And then there's talent. Who do you have? How do you hire? How do your people you hire align with your purpose and the impact that you've all agreed as a board, that your organization as a school is determined to make? What does that look like? Okay, so again, we're going to move, I'm going to work on, show you 2 levers today, because we don't have time to go through all 5 of them, and it would be actually really boring to go through all 5. So there are 5 aspects out of each of those 5. So there's a lot of different pieces that I will suggest that can happen in order to increase your capacity. But we're going to work with purpose and strategy today. All right? In part because I think those are some high leverage things that you as trustees can do. So the first thing we're going to work with is purpose as a way to expand the responsiveness. So purpose consists of impact, having people with purpose, the legacy of your school, of your organization. What's the legacy you want to leave? Connection with the community. What's your narrative? How do you describe who you are? What do you stand for? We're going to focus just specifically on connecting with the community and your overarching narrative. And just ask you to think for a minute. I'm going to give you 2 questions to commute about. But one of them, how do your stakeholders, how do they strengthen your ability to be responsive to your external environment? How do they present an opportunity for you to be more responsive, to make sure you're scanning the horizon? Who are your stakeholders? Who are your families? Who are your businesses in your community? All of those are your stakeholders because we all are dependent on the outcomes that you have. And the other one is having a narrative. Having a narrative to fire people up. You know, talk about elevator speeches, but what's your narrative for your legacy? How do you describe in a narrative what it is that you're really producing when you talk about your school? How do you do that in a way that energizes your state? So that's the purpose levers, okay? So getting really clear about your narrative and then using your stakeholders to their full opportunity. That's to increase your responsiveness. The second is we're going to increase the holding environment, the holding tank. A lot of this, and one of the frames that if we had more time I would share with you would be the concept of psychological safety. Because that is huge in making it safe for people to be creative, to be innovative. But as a board, as a set of trustees, you have incredible power to describe what you want the culture and the holding environment to be in your school. So within the role of strategy, we're going to move to a couple of key areas. One is how you set the stage for being wrong. Now, I would guess that most of you within your board meetings are able to really talk to each other and say, is this strategy right? Have we got it? How could we be wrong? But usually that kind of conversation is very private. How often really do you sit in front of a public meeting and say, are we right about this? It takes a lot of courage to step out and begin to change what kind of conversation is okay, recognizing that you've got a world out there that is changing. So this is one of my favorite questions to really get at what could we be missing? How could we be wrong? When I work with teachers, I teach them to ask each other. When I work with administrators, I have them work with their failures and ask them to really push each other, how could we be wrong? Because the stakes are high. So thinking about how transparent are you with that? And then this last one that we're going to just quickly go through. How does your strategy provide space for experimentation? Most of you have strategic goals, you have strategy, I'm assuming. Things that you're working on, ways that you're getting to reach your vision and your mission. One of the things that is really true in adaptive and complex work is that things are changing so quickly that when you have a single fine point vision, by the time you get there, it's done. It's no longer relevant. So what we're talking now today about is leaders having boundaries of a vision. These are some things that we might be seeing, but it's no longer a single point in time because we can't afford to do that. The world is changing too fast. So in having a more flexible and fluid strategy, one of the ways in which you can increase your adaptive capacity is to get into the practice of trying things out. Trying safe-to-fail experiments. What if we're not sure this is going to work. What if we did a couple of things and we tried it out for a little while? Be very transparent. Get that feedback. But try, and we call them safe to fail because you want them to be safe to fail. You don't want to put all your stake in something and that's an experiment. You want to be reasonably sure that your strategy is going to hit its mark. But the reality is most of the time, we hit a strategy, we come up with a strategy. We don't recognize that it's no more than our best guess, right? It's your best guess. You've used everything you know, all the data, all your wisdom, but it's still a guess. Most of the time, we don't know if we've succeeded or not till it's too late to change it along the way. So another way to think about strategy is to look at it in smaller chunks of time, much more reflection and find ways to check it out. Okay, we're going to go in this direction. We're going to look at this with a high school strategy. What are some small little experiments we could do around the edges that we might tell us we're on the right track and that we can then use for quick wins to let our stakeholders know that we do think we're on the right track. Okay, that is in my content. And we have 5 minutes for a kind of a last set of table conversations. And how about if I give you 3 of that to think about what you're taking away today? I slammed a whole bunch of stuff on you in the last 10 minutes, and I realize that it's overwhelming. But I'd love to have you talk about one thing, maybe that you're walking away with, one idea that might be helpful in thinking about your role as trustee in your school. So what are you walking away with? What's stuck? Yes?
You got to think about this before you launch, because even starting a conversation may be premature with the wrong people. If you want to be effective, you've got to think this through way ahead of time. Who's going to object? What's it going to be like? I mean, that's what sort of creates the works we sort of agreed upon that here. It's going to have that little bit of, before we even talk about it, what do we need to know?
Sounds like a lot of variables. Sounds like a very complex situation, right?
Yeah.
Yes. It does, but it's overwhelming, I think, a little bit if you think about, oh, I have to plan out the conversation before. So, yeah.
I'm really, what resonated with me was this how could we be wrong question.
Okay.
Because, it takes a while, I mean, for me anyway, it took me a while to find my voice on the board. And then now with things happening, just having that in my head, just to play devil's advocate in the group, I feel like that's a good place to start because you're not attacking anybody, you're just opening it up for brainstorming.
It's not a
I
gotcha
really love
question.
that.
It's a curiosity,
Yeah.
it's an inquiry question. It really is, wow, how could we be wrong? Yes.
That's my next.
So we use that when we score people in adult development level, which is a highly technical process, to determine somebody's mental complexity. And we use that, we never do it individually, we always do it collaboratively because it's so incredibly complex. And we use that question routinely in that process because there are always other ways to think about it. And if you don't ask that, sometimes you don't get at the variety of perspectives that allow for a much more powerful and better solution. Yes?
So I didn't bring this up here, but do people know Bowling Alone, that reference? So what we're looking at with these new millennial parents is a whole different ballgame of what keeps them engaged. And so when you brought up that connection with the community, that stakeholder group has really come up a lot in our discussions.
One of the questions that Mark asked early on in the session had to do with how we think about mobile devices, right? And I mean, we all know in most classrooms in this country, kids are good and they sit and they listen, and then they walk out the door and they're here. Like it or not, this is where they are. I think this is the last generation where we're going to have that huge gap. Because, I mean, I have grown children and grandchildren coming up, and I can tell you that my son and his wife are like this a lot, and so are the kids. It isn't about whether we like it or not. It is about understanding how we make that work to the advantage of educating students, and how we navigate the conversations in order to make that an advantage, rather than build that, bridge that huge gulf between what school represents for so many kids and what life is about, the world is about. And I don't mean that literally, but it is. The world is about information. When you need to know it, you learn it, not in advance anymore. Any conversations back here, takeaways? What are you walking away with?
I like the people who resist change that we just lost.
Yeah, this idea that we keep trying to say, you gotta change, you gotta change. We don't think about what's going on in the gut. And go back to that idea that you have to pace the change as well. So the axis we're at time. And this is not wanting to get into the political arena, but one of my theories on why the country is so heightened right now with emotion is you think about the pace of change over the last 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. You look at different aspects of it, and you think about how much life has changed. My theory with this behind me is that we have overloaded, but without intention, right? And it's not like anybody's causing this, but the confluence of the complex environment has overloaded our capacity to navigate that level of change. So thinking about loss, but also thinking about pacing change too. So making sure that whoever is having to navigate it can cope. So I pushed you through a whole lot of content today, and you've been really great in staying in the conversation. Very academic as compared to the section you just came from, but I really appreciate your attention, and I have such respect for what you do. I can't say that enough. I have such respect for what you do. I know what it feels like. So I hope you have a great rest of your conference.